The city of Blackwood, nestled deep within the Pacific Northwest, was known for its perpetual drizzle and the comforting, if somewhat melancholic, hum of its rainforest. Officer Ben Carter, a veteran of 20 years on the force, had seen his share of strange cases, the occasional cryptid sighting hoax, the forgotten cult, the odd recluse with a penchant for taxidermy. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the string of incidents that began in the autumn of 2023. Incidents that gnawed at the very fabric of his rational mind. It started subtly, with a series of late-night calls to dispatch. Reports of unsettling whispers, faint screams, or disembodied laughter emanating from seemingly empty houses. The addresses were scattered across town, primarily older, well-maintained homes in established neighborhoods, not the usual haunts for petty disturbances. Ben, alongside his partner Officer Davis, would respond, their flashlights cutting through the thick Blackwood fog, only to find locked doors, silent interiors, and bewildered homeowners roused from their sleep, claiming they heard nothing. The first truly disturbing call came from the Peterson residence. A charming Victorian on Elm Street, Mrs. Peterson, a frail woman in her late 70s, had reported a child sobbing coming from her attic for 3 nights straight. When Ben and Davis arrived, the house was dark, but a distinct, mournful whimpering could be heard from the upper floors. They ascended cautiously, their hands on their service weapons, the sound growing louder with each creaking step, only to find the attic empty, the whimpering abruptly ceasing as they breached the threshold. It felt like it was right there, Davis muttered, his voice barely a whisper, as they swept the dusty, cluttered space, finding no trace of a child, no open windows, no possible hiding spots. Mrs. Peterson, her face pale and drawn, swore it was real. The sound so vivid it felt like it was inside her head. They filed a report, marked it as an auditory hallucination, likely due to stress. But both officers felt the lingering chill of something unexplainable. The calls continued, escalating in peculiarity. A frantic homeowner claimed their antique rocking chair would rock violently on its own in the dead of night, producing a faint, rhythmic creak that sounded eerily like a lullaby. Another reported seeing a woman standing at the foot of their bed, her face obscured by shadow, whispering their name before vanishing into thin air when they dared to blink. Each incident, thoroughly investigated, yielded no physical evidence, no logical explanation. The common thread was a chilling sense of helplessness. Ben, by nature a man who believed in facts and tangible evidence, found his foundations crumbling. How do you patrol against something unseen? How do you interview a phantom? The standard police procedures were useless, leaving them with frustrated citizens and a growing dossier of inexplicable events that defied every logical explanation in their training manual. The most unnerving development was the pattern of escalation. The initial whispers gave way to visible phenomena, albeit fleeting ones. The rocking chair started to play an actual, faint, tuneless melody. The shadowed woman was now occasionally accompanied by the faint scent of lily, even in homes where no flowers were present. The fear in the callers' voices was becoming increasingly desperate, bordering on hysteria. One late shift, A call came from the old Harrington house, long abandoned after a tragic fire decades ago. The caller, a curious teenager who had dared to venture inside, reported hearing multiple voices, a cacophony of pleas and screams emanating from the burned-out shell. Ben and Davis responded, their flashlights piercing the skeletal remains of the once grand home. The air inside was heavy, oppressively cold, and filled with a faint, multi-layered murmur that sent shivers down their spines. They swept the ruined rooms, their steps crunching on charred debris. The whispers were undeniable now, a low, guttural chorus that seemed to emanate from the very walls, distinct and overlapping, like dozens of people speaking at once, just beyond the edge of audibility. Then, clear as a bell, a child's terrified cry echoed from the empty space where the staircase once stood. They found nothing as always, but they both heard it. Returning to their patrol car, shaken and silent, Ben noticed a faint, swirling mist coalesce for a split second in the rearview mirror directly behind them. He slammed on the brakes, turning to look, but the street was empty, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights. Davis, unnerved, asked what was wrong. Ben just shook his head, pushing the creeping dread down. The cases were building. The fear was mounting, and for the first time in his career, Officer Ben Carter felt utterly, terrifyingly, unprepared for the enemy he couldn't see, touch, or arrest. The eerie encounters continued to plague Blackwood, spreading like a contagion of dread. What began as isolated incidents of unsettling noises now escalated into reports of minor yet undeniable physical disturbances. Objects would move, doors would swing open and close with a deliberate slowness, and lights would flicker erratically, always in the dead of night, always without a discernible cause. The fear in the community was no longer confined to the homeowners. It had begun to ripple outwards, a tangible anxiety in the perpetual mist. Officer Ben Carter found himself losing sleep, not just from the constant late-night callouts, but from the unsettling feeling that these cases were following him home. He'd wake to phantom whispers just at the edge of his hearing, or the distinct scent of lily, a smell he now associated with inexplicable dread. His rational mind, a fortress built over 2 decades of police work, was slowly eroding under the relentless onslaught of the unexplainable. The strangest incident yet came from the old Lighthouse Inn, a historical landmark overlooking the tempestuous Blackwood coastline. The manager, a stern, no-nonsense woman, reported that the inn's antique grand piano, long silenced and kept under a heavy dust cover, had begun to play on its own. Not just random notes, but a specific melancholic tune, always the same always. At precisely 3 a.m., a spectral serenade that pierced the inn's heavy silence. When Ben and Davis arrived, the inn was dark, save for the emergency lights. They waited in the hushed lobby, their flashlights trained on the massive piano. As the clock on the wall ticked towards 3 a.m., the air grew heavy, colder than the November night outside. Precisely on the hour, a single deep note resonated. From the piano, then another, and another, slowly forming a mournful, ancient melody that filled the cavernous space. No one was there. The lid remained closed, the dust cover undisturbed. Davis, usually stoic, felt a tremor run through him. "This ain't right, Ben," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Ben could only nod, his own heart pounding. They swept the inn, checking every room, every crevice, but found no hidden mechanisms, no wires, no trickery. The manager, her face pale, could only stare at the piano, her usual stern demeanor replaced by a look of profound, terrified bewilderment. They left that night with another unexplainable report for their growing, unnerving file. The next string of calls focused on visual anomalies, no longer fleeting blurs in rearview mirrors. Residents reported seeing indistinct figures moving within their own homes, always just out of direct sight, always vanishing when fully confronted. A retired professor swore he saw a spectral child playing with antique toys in his living room, their laughter echoing eerily before fading into silence. The descriptions were vague, inconsistent, yet the terror in the callers' voices was undeniably real. The department was at a loss. Their superiors, initially skeptical, were now visibly unnerved. Psychology theories were bandied about mass hysteria, collective delusion, environmental toxins, but none fit the widespread, escalating nature of the phenomena. Ben and Davis were assigned to these unexplained cases almost exclusively, their patrol car becoming a mobile unit for investigating the paranormal, a task they were never trained for. The chill that had started in his apartment began to follow Ben everywhere. He'd feel a sudden, localized drop in temperature, even in a warm room. The scent of lily would sometimes appear out of nowhere, phantom sweet and cloying. He began to question his own sanity, wondering if the relentless exposure to these cases was finally getting to him, chipping away at his rational mind until he too would become another frantic caller. One afternoon, while reviewing archived reports on historical incidents in Blackwood, Ben stumbled upon a series of old articles from the early 1900s. They spoke of a devastating epidemic that had swept through the city, claiming countless lives, particularly children. Many of the homes now reporting strange phenomena were built on land that had been mass burial sites, or were once orphanages and hospitals during that tragic period. A chilling correlation began to form in his mind. He showed his findings to Davis, pointing to the addresses on a faded city map. "It's a pattern, Davis," Ben said, his voice low. "These aren't random. They're all connected to the epidemic, the deaths, the forgotten ones." Davis stared at the map, then at Ben, a dawning horror in his eyes. The whispers, the cries, the rocking. Chairs, the piano, they weren't random acts. They were echoes, the lingering sorrow of a past tragedy, now actively reaching out, demanding to be heard, demanding to be remembered. And for the first time, Ben felt a profound, chilling understanding of the enemy they truly faced. The realization of the epidemic's connection sent a different kind of chill through Ben, one born of a terrifying historical truth rather than mere spectral encounters. The spirits plaguing Blackwood weren't malicious demons or singular, vengeful ghosts. They were the collective, unquiet sorrow of the city's past, the forgotten victims of a plague that had swept through generations ago. now stirring from their long, undisturbed slumber. This wasn't a case for police procedure. It was a crisis of the soul. He and Davis began to delve deeper into the city archives, poring over brittle newspapers and faded ledgers. They unearthed more horrifying details. The epidemic had been particularly cruel, wiping out entire families, leaving behind countless orphans who often succumbed themselves in the hastily converted hospitals. The sheer scale of the suffering, the abruptness of death, seemed to imbue the very earth with an enduring, tragic energy that the phenomena intensified. The whispered murmurs in affected homes grew into distinct, overlapping voices, sometimes forming fragments of phrases, pleas for comfort, cries of hunger, the desperate calls for absent parents. Residents reported feeling cold hands brush their hair, or seeing fleeting shadows darting just beyond their periphery, the outlines too thin, too quick to properly discern, yet undeniably present. The Lighthouse Inn became a nexus of activity. The spectral piano now played its mournful melody at all hours, its notes echoing through the empty halls, often accompanied by the sound of faint, childish laughter from unseen sources. The inn manager, her composure completely shattered, had abandoned her post, leaving the historic building to its phantom inhabitants, a silent musical testament to the sorrow it harbored. Ben found himself growing increasingly isolated, both personally and professionally. His colleagues, already wary, now actively avoided him, their looks a mix of pity and discomfort. Alex, his roommate, had quietly moved out, unable to endure the growing chill and the inexplicable occurrences that now regularly manifested in their apartment. Objects levitating an inch off surfaces, the chilling scent of formaldehyde, a faint, sickly sweet smell that followed Ben from the archives. He spent his nights driving through Blackwood's fog-shrouded streets, drawn to the homes marked on his historical map. He'd park outside, listening to the cacophony of phantom cries, the mournful lullabies, the sounds of unseen distress emanating from within. He felt a profound sense of despair, a crushing helplessness. How could he, a police officer, protect the living from the overwhelming grief of the dead? How could he bring peace to those who had died without it? The whispers were no longer just in his mind. They seemed to emanate from the very air around him, a constant, low thrum of sorrow that clung to him like the damp Blackwood mist. He saw them now clearly, the spectral forms of children with hollow eyes, their tiny hands outstretched, their bodies translucent, shimmering like heat haze. They were everywhere, yet nowhere, desperate, lingering fragments of lives cut tragically short. One evening, responding to a frantic call from an old schoolhouse, long since converted into apartments, Ben and Davis walked into a scene of pure, unadulterated terror. The building was filled with the deafening sound of 1,000 children crying, a collective wail of unimaginable sorrow that assaulted their ears and rattled their very bones. Lights flickered violently, objects flew across rooms, and the cold was so intense that their breath plumed like smoke. They swept through the building, their flashlights cutting through the chaos, but found no living soul, only the escalating, palpable grief of the unseen. Ben saw a spectral child, clearer than any before, standing right in front of him, its face contorted in a silent scream, its eyes filled with an ancient, unbearable pain that mirrored the sorrow in his own heart. He reached out, an instinctive, desperate gesture, but his hand passed straight through the ephemeral form dot as they retreated from the wailing schoolhouse. Shaken to their core, Ben noticed a new phenomenon. The mist in his rearview mirror was no longer fleeting. It now seemed to cling to the back of their patrol car, a perpetual swirling cloud of sorrow, reflecting the faint, indistinct forms of spectral children, their tiny faces pressed against the glass, their silent cries echoing in the terrifying silence of the long, endless night. They were no longer just haunting the homes. They were following him, clinging to him, their silent pleas growing louder, their desperation palpable, as if he, Ben Carter, was becoming their last desperate hope. The profound and terrifying realization that the spirits were now actively pursuing him, clinging to him like shadows, sent a jolt of pure terror through Ben. The mist in the rearview mirror became a constant companion, a swirling vortex of indistinct faces that watched his every move. The whispers, no longer confined to his mind, now seemed to emanate from the very fabric of his patrol car, a relentless chorus of sorrow that vibrated through the metal and glass. He stopped taking calls, unable to face another encounter with the unseen, fearing what new horror they might reveal, or what fresh piece of himself they might claim. His superiors, exasperated and bewildered by his increasingly erratic behavior, eventually placed him on indefinite leave, citing stress-related exhaustion. They couldn't help him, not against an enemy that left no fingerprints, no physical evidence, only a profound and terrifying impact on the human psyche. Ben retreated to his now empty apartment, the lingering scent of formaldehyde and lily a constant reminder of the unseen presences. He barricaded himself inside, drawing the blinds, shutting out the world. But the spectral activity only intensified. Objects now hurtled through the air, thrown by unseen hands. Lights flickered violently, plunging the apartment into chaotic darkness before blazing back to life. The cold was unbearable, seeping into his very bones, turning his sanctuary into a tomb. The spectral forms, once fleeting and indistinct, now materialized with terrifying clarity. Children with hollow eyes, their skin translucent, their mouths open in silent screams, swirled around him, their tiny, icy hands brushing against his skin. He saw the old woman from the Peterson house, her face etched with despair, her skeletal fingers beckoning him. He saw the stern manager of the Lighthouse Inn, her form shimmered with an echoing, mournful music. They were all there, the collective anguish of Blackwood's forgotten past, finally visible, finally undeniable. Their pleas, once faint whispers, became a deafening cacophony in his mind, overlapping, desperate, demanding. They wanted release, peace, recognition. They wanted him to understand their suffering, to bear witness to the raw agony of their untimely deaths. And in their collective desperation, they were drawing him deeper, siphoning his own life force, his own sanity, to fuel their haunting, to amplify their cries. He tried to fight back, to scream, to lash out at the ethereal forms, but his body was weak, his voice hoarse. He was losing control, his mind fraying at the edges, slowly succumbing to the overwhelming flood of their collective sorrow. He recognized their faces now, faces from the old newspaper articles, photographs of children and families long dead, their names etched into the archives of Blackwood's tragic history. They were no longer nameless, faceless victims. They were individuals, each with their own story, their own agonizing death. The boundaries between his reality and theirs completely dissolved. He was no longer just seeing them. He was experiencing their final moments. He felt the burning fever, the suffocating cough, the agonizing shortness of breath. He felt the cold touch of death, the slow creeping darkness as life left their fragile bodies. He was reliving the epidemic, not as an observer, but as its final living victim, destined to join their silent, sorrowful ranks. The apartment itself seemed to transform, its modern decor melting away, replaced by the grim, makeshift beds of a crowded sick ward, the sounds of distant weeping filling the air. The faint scent of lily became the overpowering stench of death and decay. He was no longer in his living room. He was in a Blackwood hospital centuries ago, surrounded by the dying, becoming one of them. His last coherent thought was of Davis, of his partner's unwavering belief in facts, in evidence. He knew Davis wouldn't believe this, couldn't comprehend the true enemy they faced. The police, with all their procedures and their weapons, were utterly, tragically useless against a force that operated beyond the realm of the living. A sorrow so profound it permeated the very land. When the landlord finally entered Ben's apartment days later, drawn by the unsettling silence and the persistent, unidentifiable cold, they found him collapsed on the floor, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the ceiling. His skin was impossibly cold to the touch, and a faint, sweet scent, like lily after a long rain, hung heavy in the air. There was no physical injury, no sign of foul play, nothing the police could ever explain. But later that night, as the patrol cars circled the neighborhood, a faint, rhythmic creak, eerily like a lullaby, began to emanate from the silence of Ben Carter's empty apartment. The unseen force of Blackwood had simply claimed another soul, and the cycle of sorrow, unhelped and undeterred, continued its haunting vigil.